Now normally I would be doing this face onto the camera, but today I'm going to emulate the style of Juliet India Mobile, a fantastic channel that you should check out because he has a wonderful collection that puts mine to shame. But if you're looking forward to seeing my pickups of the last month or so, then you just wait until after these. Now, as tradition dictates in this channel, I will be starting with the most recent games and then moving my way through them down to the juicy retro at the end. So that being said, we're going to start with a game for the PlayStation 5, and the only game for the PlayStation 5 that I've picked up in the last couple of months, and that game is Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Now obviously this game did come out way back with the PlayStation 4 and I did spend a little bit of time with it, but one of the issues that I had with the game was the amount of backtracking that you had to do. Now of course that's not unusual when it comes to games of this size and scope, but sometimes it was just a little bit too much. Now I'm hoping with the PlayStation 5 port there may be some reduction in the loading times and will make this gameplay just seem a bit smoother. Or it could have been quite simply I wasn't quite in the mood to play a game of that type back when I first tried it in the PlayStation 4, and now's the time to give it another chance. But that's Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order for the PlayStation 5 into the collection. Next up we're moving down the generation onto the PlayStation 4, and the first game that I'm going to show you from the pickups is Far Cry New Dawn. Now Far Cry 5 is a game that I absolutely adored when it first came out, and not only when it first came out, I'm quite happy to sit down and experience that game again. Now Far Cry New Dawn, despite being a standalone game, is very much like an extended DLC. Don't get me wrong, still worthy of a title in itself, but for all intents and purposes it could have just been a DLC for Far Cry 5. Now I don't want to put you off going out to buy Far Cry New Dawn for yourself because it is a worthwhile experience. Just don't expect it to be as long or as involved as of course Far Cry 5. Next up for the PlayStation 4 is a game that I had to bring in because I want to collect all the games in this particular series, and that is Assassin's Creed Chronicles. Now Assassin's Creed Chronicles is a game that I haven't played, or I should say it's 3 or 4 games that I haven't played, because they're not traditional Assassin's Creed games, they're 2D platformers by the looks of things. I haven't played them so I can't really speak too much about them, but they're part of the Assassin's Creed collection and I had to get that in, and I will get round to playing that and finding out what these Chronicle games are all about. Now one thing that I was absolutely delighted to get into the collection was this here. Uncharted, the Nathan Drake Collection Special Edition for the PlayStation 4, and yes, I do have the PlayStation 4 Uncharted 4 Special Edition, so these two companion pieces will sit lovely side by side on the shelf, and one that yes, I was absolutely delighted to get my hands on. So that's all the current generation games that I've picked up over the past little while that I've been dying to show you all so I can, well, get them up on the shelf, because they don't move into the Omega collection until you see them first. Moving swiftly on, we're going to drop down a generation to the PlayStation 3, and I did pick up 3 PlayStation 3 games this month. The first of which, and you'll notice a theme here, was one of the Assassin's Creed mainline sort of games that I didn't have in the collection, Assassin's Creed Rogue. Now, one of the reasons I didn't have that in the collection was simply due to the fact that I didn't put a lot of playtime into it back when it originally came out. Not because it's a bad game, it was just the fact that you played as a Templar Knight and that didn't sit well with me at the time. But of course, if you're going to go for a full Assassin's Creed collection, you need to have Rogue in there, as well as having 3 in there already, which is my least favourite game of the series. Next up for the PlayStation 3 is Risen 2 Dark Waters. Now this is a game that I don't know much about. I know it's an RPG, a Western RPG. I know it didn't get very good reviews at the time when it came out, but that also sits quite well with me. I do like a bad game. I like to explore a bad game just to see how bad it truly is, and hopefully it's a bad game that's bad for good reasons. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. A little bit of cheese rather than just a completely broken mess of a game or a thoroughly boring game. But Risen 2 will be getting played soon just to see why it has such a bad reputation, and no doubt I'll get back to you on that at some point in the near future. And last up for the PlayStation 3 we have Eat Lead, the return of Matt Hazard. Now, I had no idea what this game was about or anything. I'd never experienced it before. never seen it back in the day, but when I was reading the back it really intrigued me, because as you can see, it's supposed to be a parody on retro games and then moving forward to the current generation. Also, I want you to notice that Neil Patrick Harris has voiced characters in this, and that was another thing that drew me. It's supposed to be a bad game, but who knows? I won't know until I play it myself, but that's another one that I'll play quite soon and hopefully get back to you with an answer. Now next up, we're moving away from Sony and onto Microsoft, but not Microsoft, Xbox. I have picked up one PC game recently, and that is Sid Meier's Civilization 4 Colonizaion. Now the reason that I picked this up was quite simple. The first Colonizaion game was a game that I played to death back in the day, and this here apparently is some sort of reimagining of the original game with modern graphics and a modern interface and making it a little bit more enjoyable for a modern gamer. Now of course I can quite happily sit back and play the original Colonizaion, but I'm thoroughly looking forward to seeing how they've modernised the game and will it capture me as much as the original. Moving on to some Nintendo now, and I've picked up a couple of DS games, and again I will always blame RetroEd UK for me picking up DS games. It was a system that I had very little interest in back in the day, but I'm starting to fall in love with it now, and probably the main factor behind that is not so much the DS games themselves, but if you have a DS Lite you can play Game Boy Advance games and that is a wonderful thing to have in the palm of your hand. But for the DS I did pick up this here, which is Secret Files Tunguska. Have no idea what it's about, but I'll give it a go at some point and hopefully it's a game that will capture my attention. It doesn't have great reviews, but again that's something that I look for in a game. If I want to play a really good game I have a whole library there to pick from, but finding that gem of a really bad game that you can sit down and have a proper giggle with is also an experience worth having by anyone, well in my opinion anyway. Next up for the DS is a game that I do know, and I know fairly well because it's Bust-A-Move DS. Now I haven't played Bust-A-Move on the DS, I've only ever played it on the Sony PlayStation, but let me tell you, having Bob and Bob from Bubble Bobble, busting bubbles and Bust-A-Move, well that's quite a tongue twister, but it's a great little puzzle game, Bust-A-Move, and I'm happy to have it on the DS as well, because you can't always just fire up your console and play on a decent sized screen, because sometimes you just have to leave the games room, and for that we have handheld systems like the DS. So Bust-A-Move DS, happy to have that into the collection. Moving on now, we're moving on to the PlayStation 2, and as many of you will know, the PlayStation 2 has been the focus of my collection for the past couple of years. Now as I've been hinting, that is starting to slow down a bit and I'm starting to look at other systems, which is why you've seen games from the likes of the DS, GameCube, Nintendo 64, Atari 2600 and so many different systems starting to establish themselves in the collection. But the PlayStation 2 is still a system that's close to my heart, and there's still plenty of titles out there that I want to have for that system. But I'm going to start with the sports titles, get them out of the way, because not everyone appreciates the sports titles, and rightly so, because I'm one of those people anyway. So the first sports title coming into the PlayStation 2 collection is World Championship Snooker 2002, and I do like a good snooker game, I like a good pool game as well. I'm more at home with snooker being from the UK. Next up is a sports title from a genre, and probably the very first genre of sports games that I ever played, because this here is a Premiership Manager, and it's a 2002-2003 season. Probably means nothing to you if you know nothing about football, or should I say soccer if you don't know what I'm talking about, but that's a football manager game. I do love football manager games, and I have done since the very first football manager on the ZX Spectrum way back in 1982, 1983, and as basic as the old specky game is, it was something that hooked me right from the start, and I have continued to play them ever since, which is why next up we have Championship Manager 5. Now Championship Manager was a fantastic title back in 1993, a game that I originally played on the Atari ST, sorry Commodore Amiga fans, but the ST was, well, for me, and that's probably when I properly get hooked onto the football management simulation games. Next up for the sports title is another genre of sports title that I do have close to my heart, and that is Athens 2004. Now not obviously Athens 2004 But going back to track and field and the likes, I have played these games since the mid 80s and I still love them today. They can however take a toll on your controller or joystick, joypad or whatever way that you played those games back on the ZX Spectrum. I played on the keyboard and I'm sure it wasn't good for the keyboard or whatever you were playing on to be rattling the buttons as fast as you needed to be to play those particular games, but they're such good fun and they're great multiplayer games too. And last up for the sports titles is my favourite genre probably when it comes to sports titles, and that's golf, and I've picked up Tiger Woods PGA Tour 2007. Looking forward to reminiscing over that with my friends because again it's a great multiplayer game as well as one that you can just sit back and chill and not put too much thought into. Now next up we're still with the PlayStation 2 but we're moving away from the sports games and onto games that I wanted to pick up, whether that be because it's a game of a series that I'm trying to get the whole subset for, or just a style of game that I'm truly interested in, or one that I had back in the day that I want back into the collection now. And the first of those games is Rayman M. Now I played the early Rayman games, I didn't play them on the PlayStation 2. I will get round to this one just to see how well it evolved over the years, but I'm sure it'll be absolutely fine. It probably won't have the same nostalgia factor for me not having played that one, but I'm sure I'll enjoy it anyway. Next up is Casper and the Ghostly Trio. Now I didn't play this one either, I played the original Casper game on the PlayStation and thoroughly enjoyed that little experience, and of course being a kid from the 70s I grew up with Casper on the TV as a cartoon that I would watch. So when I saw Casper and the Ghostly Trio, there was no doubt about it, I was going to pick it up, it was going to come into the collection. Next up we have a Disney game because we have Donald Duck's Quack Attack. It's the PlayStation 2 version, and now I do believe that there is a PlayStation 1 version of that game, and another thing that I like to have in the collection is PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 versions of the same game. Yes, I know that's a little bit insane, but you know what, each to our own, we collect in our own ways. Next up is another type of game, or multiple types of game, that I absolutely love in the collection, and that is compilations, and this one is the Mega Drive collection in the PlayStation 2. A selection of games that I could play over and over again on multiple different systems, but if I see a compilation out there, I will pick it up, and that's just an addiction that I have to deal with anyway. And following the Mega Drive collection on the PlayStation 2, I also picked up the Atari Anthology for the PlayStation 2 because I have that on every other system as well. Again, it's just nice to have these collections on multiple different systems that you can play and compare. Now obviously I can quite happily sit down and play the Atari games on an Atari 2600 if I want to, but having those games on different systems just adds a little bit of spice, well it does for me anyway. Next up is a game that I had to add because it's a subset of games that I want them all, and that is Driver 3. I have Driver 1 and 2 up there and Driver San Francisco. Now as far as I'm aware that's the last of the Driver games, so hopefully that subset's complete. If it's not and there's anything else that I need for that, you drop that down into the comments for me and I will thank you greatly. Next up is a genre that I'm collecting for as well because it's a genre I love. It's the dogfighting genre, and here we have Heroes of the Pacific from Codemasters. Now the reason I pick up so many dogfighting titles is because back in the day I did play on the PC Red Baron. I spoke about this before, I'll probably speak about it again, but since then I just haven't been able to find that one perfect dogfighting game that could suck me in as much as that Red Baron game. So anytime I see a dogfighting game, it doesn't matter what system it's on, I've got to pick it up. So Heroes of the Pacific will get its very own shot at being my go-to dogfighting game, well maybe anyway. Next up is another subset game, and I was quite happy to get my hands on this one, and it's Tenchu Fatal Shadows. Now I haven't played Fatal Shadows, I've only ever played Tenchu and Tenchu 2, which were games that absolutely blew my mind back when they were released on the PlayStation. I honestly don't know why I didn't get round to the later releases on the newer consoles, but now I'm in a position where I'm collecting for multiple systems and trying to play through some of the games that I didn't manage to get to back in the day. So the modern Tenchu games are definitely on that list for me to get them picked up into the collection and get them played. And last up for the PlayStation 2 pickups we have Evil Dead, Fistful of Boomstick, because Well, it's Evil Dead. I mean, there's no need to explain why I would be picking that up, because I just absolutely love the franchise. I have done since the original movie, which I was fortunately allowed to watch as a fairly young kid back in the 80s, mainly because my parents were of the type that thought, well, if you're going to be silly enough to watch it, then you take the responsibilities of the nightmares. And I'm really happy to report that there were no subsequent nightmares, and I went on to absolutely love the franchise. So Evil Dead, Fistful of Boomstick, very happy to have that in the collection now. Next up, we're moving on to the N64. Now, the Nintendo 64 is not a system that I've ever really collected for. I'm only just starting at the moment, but I've picked up a few PCs. The first of those PCs being a box Nintendo 64 controller pack, and I believe that's some sort of memory card. Again, I don't know very much about the Nintendo 64 or what I should be buying, so whatever I see at a decent price, I'll just pick it up anyway. Next we have a game that I picked up for the Nintendo 64, and that is Goldeneye 007. Now, the reason that I picked up Goldeneye, and yes, the box is not in great condition, I didn't pick it up for the box, I purely picked it up for the game, because Jonathan Heiss over at Back in the Day Gaming has really rekindled one of the few memories that I do have of the Nintendo 64, and that is 007 Goldeneye. So when I saw it out in the wild at a really good price, I just thought I'd pull the trigger, get Goldeneye into the collection and get round to playing it again. And the last Nintendo 64 item is this here. It's a box Nintendo 64 clear purple controller, or a fantastic atomic purple depending on where you're from. Now, this is in mint condition, and I was absolutely ecstatic to get my hands on that thing there. You don't always see the fantastic coloured ones, but you see plenty of them, and the sticks tend to be a bit on the loose side. That one there seems to have come from a collector who has bought it purely for the item and never used it. All the plastic and everything is inside. Absolutely ecstatic to get what is essentially a brand new controller, and for a very good price as well. So with the Nintendo 64 out of the way, we'll move on to the PlayStation purchases, and we'll start with this one here, Duke Nukem. And again, it's a game that I didn't play a lot of back in the day, and mostly because first person shooters gave me motion sickness. I still from time to time suffer with it, especially with older games, but Duke Nukem's a classic and you need it in your collection even if you can only play it for 20-minute spells. And probably a 20-minute spell of Duke Nukem is enough for anyone just to scratch that itch anyway. But of course, having Duke Nukem for the PlayStation in, and I saw Duke Nukem Time to Kill out there, had to pick that up as well, because why have one example when you can have two? Next up is a game that harks back to one of the other games that I picked up, a game that I picked up for the DS because I managed to get my hands on Bobble for the PlayStation. Now, Bobble is such a wonderful game, a classic arcade game that is absolutely loved by many, or most people anyway, who grew up with it. And yes, it's on various different systems, and if it comes up in other systems, I would buy those other versions too. You just can't have too many ports of Bobble. I will state that the box art for the Bobble port, and you know what, I'm going to pick that back up there for you just to have a proper look at it. That box art is absolutely hideous. Completely hideous, but it's a great game. And of course, we have inside it not only just Bobble, but Rainbow Islands is in there as well. So that's two classic arcade games for the price of one, and I got them at a bargain. Now, next up is not one game but several games again, because I do like a good compilation. And we have the Arcade Greatest Hits, the Midway Collection 2, and this has got such a wonderful selection of games on it. As you can see from the back here, we have Moon Patrol, Spy Hunter, Splat, Root Beer Tapper, which we just called Tapper back in the day, Blaster, Burger Time, Joust 2. So it's a selection of great arcade games from back in the day, games that I absolutely loved in the arcades that I can play on my PlayStation now, and that makes me very happy indeed. Now, the last game for the PlayStation picked up was Time Crisis. Now, of course, I don't have a light gun at the moment because I haven't set up the CRT, but I did pick up one other thing, and that other thing was what prompted me to get Time Crisis, because I picked myself up the Sony PlayStation mouse, which you can use to play Time Crisis. To be fair, I did technically pick up the mouse to play Broken Sword and other point and click games, but it will come in useful for the on-mail shooter games that you can also play with it. Not just Time Crisis, but of course you have the Die Hard trilogy, which is that on-mail shooting part that you can use the mouse for as well. So next up, we're moving back to the Nintendo, because I did pick up a game for the Super Nintendo, and it's an important game for me in my particular collection anyway, because you all know how much I love a truly bad game, and I don't think you get much more truly bad in Rise of the Robots, and not just on the Super Nintendo port, but every single port that game came out on. Yes, it was going to be the next big thing. It never happened. It was overhyped and not a very good game, but had to come into the collection purely because of that, because video game history is just as important as playing video games themselves. Now, next up for the game pickups, we're staying with the same generation, Generation 4, but moving over to Sega for the Mega Drive, or Genesis if you're from the States. I did pick up Lemmings. Now, Lemmings wasn't a game that I played a lot of back on the Mega Drive. I mostly played it on PC when it originally came out, but another thing that I do love to have in the collection is comparison games that I can compare the different ports of. So I will still play the PC version, but I'm now going to be able to play the Mega Drive version and just see how well that Mega Drive pad can cope with a game that was originally designed for PC gaming. And as I will do any times Lemmings manages to force its way to the front of my mind, I will start pondering that old question: how did DMA get from Lemmings to Grand Theft Auto? Because there is a puzzler for you right there. So there you go, my friends, that's the pickups that I've made over the last couple of months that are coming into the Omega collection, and well, what did you think of them? For me, of course, I'm happy with everything that I brought into the collection, but here are of course a selection of the things that I found most interesting coming into the collection anyway. But let me know what you think. Drop down into the comments and let me know about any of the games that you've seen picked up today and whether you want them still, or if you have them in your collection, or if they're games much like Rise of the Robots where people would be quite happy to see that fired into the sun and forgotten about for all time, because the interaction between you and me is what makes YouTube special. Well, it does for me anyway. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, cheerio.